Good morning, and welcome to your morning cereal. Good morning, and welcome to Wednesday. It's the middle of the work week, and it's also the Chinese New Year's, also known as the Spring Festival. But it's simply the beginning of the Chinese New Year. And if you feel the earth trembling beneath your feet, that's because it's estimated that nearly 25% of the Earth's population celebrates the Chinese New Year. In the event you had forgotten, like me, in the United States, we base our New Year's on the Gregorian calendar, which tracks the Earth's orbit around the sun, whereas the Chinese New Year's uses a lunisolar calendar that tracks the moon's orbit around the Earth. The more you know. It's also National Cornchip Day and National Puzzle Day, so it's a win-win for 100% of the Earth's population. Okay, it's time for today's quotes. One fun, nostalgic quote, and then a second quote to tease our book review later in the episode. As always, I hope one of these quotes speak to you and jumpstart your day in a positive direction. All right, the first quote is, "Never doubt yourself. Never change who you are. Don't care what people think, and just go for it." Again, sage words there about being confident and pursuing your dreams. But does it help or hurt this quote to know that it's from Britney Spears? That's for you to decide. And today's teaser quote for the book review is, "Listening was not mere silence, but a form of activity." And as usual, we'll unpack that here in just a minute or two during the book review segment. But first, let's jump into our usual dose of fun and historic facts from this day in history. Today's news facts are for January 29th. In 1595, William Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet is thought to have been performed for the first time, but it was officially published 2 years later in 1957. In 1845, American author Edgar Allan Poe, his poem The Raven, it was first published, and it appeared in the New York Mirror. It went on to become one of the best-known poems in American literature. Then in 1892, the Coca-Cola Company, it was incorporated in Atlanta, Georgia. Finally, to the 20th century, in 1919, the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution was ratified and it went into effect the following year, better known as Prohibition. And on this day in 2002, U.S. President George W. Bush, delivering his State of the Union address, he described Iraq, Iran, and North Korea as an axis of evil for their attempts to develop nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. And just to make sure I don't have two really bad transitions into birthdays 2 days in a row, the number 1 and number 2 television shows on this date in 2002 would have been Friends and CSI, Crime Scene Investigation. And now a much nicer transition into happy birthday. If today is your birthday, happy birthday. You share a birthday with John D. Rockefeller. In 1874, he was born. Magnum PI, Tom Selleck, he's 80 today. Oprah Winfrey, she's 71. And Greg Louganis, he's 65. You might remember him as the diver that hit his head in the Olympics. Okay, now to the music and the movies of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. The number 1 song on this date in 1999 was Baby One More Time by Britney Spears. And for those of you doing the math, it was nearly 27 years ago when this song was released back in 1998. And just to pile it on just a little bit more, that's nearly as far back as Marty McFly went back to in the movie Back to the Future. The song Baby One More Time was originally called Hit Me Baby One More Time, but bands passed on the song and the title was changed because people were worried how the words hit me might be interpreted. The writer suggested that it was just slang for call me. Either way, the song landed as Britney's debut song and first number 1 song. And if you remember the video of schoolgirl Britney dancing in the hallways of the school, you may have noticed that the video was shot at Rydell High School, or at least that's what they called it in the movie Grease when the Pink Ladies and the Greasers ruled the school. It's actually Venice High School in Los Angeles. And the number 1 movie on this date in 1977 was King Kong. King Kong was the remake of the original oversized monkey movie from 1933. Apparently, it opened up to mixed reviews and it did modestly at the box office, and it made back over triple its budget. From what I understand, a large amount of the budget and time was spent building on some of these full-size King Kong features like his head and his hands, and in the end, they primarily used a man in a suit because they just couldn't get the robotics to look right. Movie magic has come a long way since then. Okay, let's move on to some personal growth in the book review segment of the morning serial. This is where we take a few moments to reflect on lessons learned from the current book we're reading. And currently, we're reading through Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a timeless book that is consistently on all the must-read lists, and it's packed with rock-solid advice and actions for all of us to use and build healthy foundational concepts to live by. Yesterday, we began Chapter 4 of Part 2, and that's entitled An Easy Way to Become a Good Conversationalist. Carnegie started this chapter out by telling a story about himself being labeled the most interesting conversationalist by someone else when Carnegie hardly said a word and just listened attentively. And we learned that attentively listening to another person can be very flattering to that person. We ended yesterday with a quote by former Harvard President Charles Eliot saying that exclusive attention to the person who is speaking to you is very important. Nothing else is so flattering as that, end quote. And Eliot was known as a great listener. Novelist Henry James described him this way. For, quote, Dr. Eliot listening was not mere silence, but a form of activity, end quote. And James continued to describe just how attentive, with positive body positions, etc., that Dr. Eliot had while listening, and that he, quote, seemed to be listening with his eyes as well as his ears. He listened with his mind and attentively considered what you had to say while you said it. At the end of an interview, the person who had talked to him felt that he had had his say, end quote. Carnegie again points to the fact that what he's talking about here isn't rocket science. It's, quote, self-evident, as he puts it. But yet the practice still escapes the average person. We simply are not a culture of good listeners, which may be further exacerbated today, given the speed of the world in which we live in and the truncated sound bites we've grown accustomed to. And to this point of the average person lacking listening skills, Carnegie gives an example of a sales clerk in a store who wouldn't listen to a customer that was trying to return a damaged item, basically fighting with the customer about return policies. And at the last second, the manager swoops in to save the day by calmly listening to the customer and making the situation right, ultimately keeping a long-term customer. But we've all been in that situation where we just feel like the person on the other side of the counter or on the other side of the phone just isn't hearing us. And active listening isn't just important at work or out in the world, but active listening is just as important for interpersonal relationships as well. Carnegie gives another example of a mother who worked very hard to make sure she actively listened when one of her children spoke to her. One night, one of her children said that he knew that his mother loved him very much, and the mother replied that, of course she loved him, and asked if he ever doubted that. And the child responded, quote, no, but I really know you love me because whenever I want to talk to you about something, you stop whatever you're doing and you listen to me, end quote. Note to self, set the phone down when the kids are talking to you. Carnegie goes on to say that an active listener can actually potentially calm even the most upset of people down by being patient, listening, and sympathizing. As Carnegie puts it, quote, a listener who will be silent while the irate fault finder dilates like a king cobra and spews the poison out of his system, end quote. Here, Carnegie tells a story about a company that was trying to handle, as Carnegie puts it, quote, the most vicious customer who ever cursed a customer service representative, end quote. In fact, this was a long-standing issue. The customer cursed at the representatives, he refused to pay bills, he wrote letters to the newspapers, and even filed complaints and suits against the company. So pretty bad. But as the story goes, it took 4 separate personal visits to the customer from the company's top troubleshooter, where he sat and listened. He said yes, he sympathized with the customer's issues for hours at a time. And by the 4th visit, the customer was almost on friendly terms with the company's rep. And Carnegie says, quote, in reality, what he had really wanted was a feeling of importance. He got this feeling of importance at first by kicking and complaining. But as soon as he got this feeling of importance from a representative of the company, his imagined grievances vanished into thin air, end quote. And this story still rings true today. It's similar to when we ask to speak with a manager. Oftentimes, we just want to find the person who is willing to listen to our issue and sympathize with us. As someone who has managed people and as a business owner, I learned early in my career that the best way to deal with someone who is upset is to listen to them attentively. Make sure they feel heard, in whole, and then sympathize with them. Understand their perspective. I never made promises, but I did hear them out, and they felt that. And that was nearly always more than enough to move the issue forward enough to to identify the positive next steps. Okay, listen up. Just kidding. Tomorrow we'll finish chapter 4 and learn Carnegie's principle number 4. So be sure to come back for that and to hear a story of how a man was able to start his career by getting celebrities to write him back. Okay, get out there and have a great day today. You're almost to the downhill side of the week. Maybe put the phone down one extra time today to give somebody your undivided attention when listening to them. You'll both appreciate it. Okay, join us tomorrow as we finish chapter 4 and have a fantastic day. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Morning Serial podcast on the One Life Live It channel. You can find more episodes and videos by visiting our YouTube channel and the website at Sean Inglis and at SeanInglis.com, where you can also follow our other podcasts, the Mr. and Mrs. Inglis podcast and the Life Happens podcast. In these other podcasts, we'll dive deeper into everyday issues, self-improvement and well-being, business and finance, and we welcome special guests too. So join us. It'll be a good time, I promise. Thanks again for listening. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you tomorrow.